31 campus que tenemos. Nos tocó aquí, como Campus Santa Fe, ser sede de este importante evento, donde vemos que la parte más importante para México del mundo ya no es el dinero, no es la tecnología, es lo que dice ahí, el talento. Entonces, el talento yo creo que es el caso más importante. Y bueno, estas instituciones como Offer Economics, la OEA y el Tecnológico de Monterrey, el gobierno federal y otras instituciones están participando aquí de forma muy importante y les queremos agradecer realmente, mi querido Otto, que nos hayan permitido Jorge, Adrián y todo el equipo que viene aquí acompañándonos, que estén también pues el talento más importante que tenemos el TEC de Monterrey, que son nuestros alumnos, porque lo que van a ver ahorita, chicos, no vienen los libros, son temas de vanguardia. Normalmente se maneja eso en tema más cerrado, pero lo que más nos interesa es velocidad, porque si no le metemos velocidad, el 2021 va a ser mañana, y si nos ponemos de acuerdo en el 2021 se nos va a acabar el bono. Entonces, bienvenidos a esta su casa, y empezamos ya con la presentación formal. Yo nomás quería pues agradecerles aquí a Ricardo, nuestro vicerrector en toda la parte de talento aquí del TEC de Monterrey, y todas las autoridades que ahorita los van a presentar, y bienvenidos.
Gracias.
Muy buenos días, tengan todos ustedes. En nombre del Tecnológico de Monterrey y de la Organización de los Estados Americanos, reciban la más cordial bienvenida a la presentación del estudio Talento Global 2021, la nueva geografía de talento, el caso México, realizado por Oxford Economics. Para dar inicio con este evento, invitamos al maestro Otto Granados Roldán, director del Instituto de Administración Pública del Sistema Tecnológico de Monterrey, para que nos dé un mensaje de introducción al evento.
Muy buenos días a todas y todos ustedes. Quisiera reiterar la bienvenida en nombre del Sistema Tecnológico de Monterrey a esta presentación y agradecer muy en particular a las instituciones participantes en el evento, muy en especial, muy en particular a Jorge Sagiante, que ha sido un aliado fundamental para el Tecnológico de Monterrey y la Organización de Estados Americanos, no solamente en la parte que ya tenemos muy consolidada de los programas de becas y de estancias que tenemos desde hace años con la OEA, sino ahora en particular en los últimos años en muchos temas relacionados de competitividad. El Tecnológico de Monterrey, gracias un poco al estímulo y a la promoción de Jorge y de la OEA, es la única institución de apoyo participante de la RIAC, y eso nos ha permitido estar en un frecuente contacto con ellos en particular. También le agradezco muchísimo, por supuesto, a Adrián Cooper, muy en particular a Ricardo Flores Zambada, al subsecretario José Antonio Torre, que está con nosotros, a Rosín, y a todo el equipo que han hecho posible este evento tan relevante. Bueno, simplemente 2 o 3 palabras introductorias a la parte, digamos, sustanciosa del evento, que es en efecto la presentación de este estudio, que me parece que es fundamental como para entender hacia dónde va tanto el mundo del talento y del diseño, formulación y ejecución de política pública en esta materia, como lo que tiene que ver un poco con la demanda del mercado laboral. En este sentido, vamos a conocer a continuación, como un lanzamiento en México, el estudio que Oxford Economics hizo con los auspicios de varias empresas y de la Organización de Estados Americanos sobre esto que se llama ahora un poco el nuevo mundo del talento global 2021. El estudio se basa, como lo explicará Adrián en unos minutos, en 2 componentes fundamentales. El primero de ellos, una encuesta que se hizo entre 352 empresas globales como para identificar un poco cuáles son sus necesidades a futuro de formación, de atracción de talento. Y el segundo componente, la construcción de un sólido modelo de información económica a nivel de 21 a 22 ramas económicas que se establecieron para 46 países, 10 de los cuales son miembros de la Organización de Estados Americanos. ¿Cuál es un poco el sentido, la utilidad que tiene un informe, un reporte de esta naturaleza? Son varias. El primero de ellos, evidentemente, es que, como dije hace un minuto, constituye una herramienta fundamental para el diseño, para la formulación y para la ejecución de políticas públicas, de políticas privadas y de políticas académicas, para ver si, por ejemplo, en el TEC estamos realmente formando un poco el capital humano en la dirección correcta de hacia dónde va el mundo. Segundo, el estudio, en mi opinión, nos confirma algo que ya alguna otra evidencia empírica internacional nos ha venido mostrando, que es un poco las eventuales o potenciales disonancias entre formación de talento y crecimiento y competitividad económica de los países. Una de las conclusiones a las que llega el estudio, lo explicará con mucho detalle Adrián, es que en países como los nuestros, países emergentes, se está formando un capital, una cantidad de talento importante que puede producir eventualmente un cierto superávit, que podrá ser atraído por economías como las nuestras, si vamos entrando a la etapa de la innovación, etcétera, o por otros países desarrollados que requerirán importar talento de donde lo haya. Y al revés, los países desarrollados, que eventualmente por razones demográficas o por razones económicas, siguen un poco en la economía del conocimiento, en esa transición hacia una economía mucho más sofisticada, probablemente por esa misma circunstancia no están formando el talento o el capital humano suficiente y podrían atraerlo efectivamente hacia estas economías. Así que esto nos plantea áreas realmente importantes de oportunidad en los dos sentidos, en la parte de política pública y en la parte de formación académica, y esperamos efectivamente que de aquí surjan ideas puntuales, un poco de mejoramiento, de corrección, de orientación mucho más fina y más sofisticada en este diseño fundamental, y que claro, para todos los que nos siguen ahora por internet, por web, y para los que están aquí presentes, les sirva también un poco para orientar su propia planeación profesional de mediano y de largo plazo. Dicho esto, mil gracias a todos por estar aquí, muchas gracias a la OEA nuevamente por su gran colaboración y entusiasmo en esta presentación, y bueno, pues vamos a seguir con el programa que tenemos previsto. Mil gracias.
Muchas gracias, maestro. Continuando con la apertura, invitamos al señor Jorge Sagiante, secretario ejecutivo del Desarrollo Integral de la OEA, para que también nos dé un mensaje de apertura.
Gracias. Buenos días a todas ustedes, a todos. Voy a ser muy breve, creo que lo importante en esta mañana es el estudio que justamente se va a presentar aquí. Yo quisiera, en nombre de la Organización de los Estados Americanos, agradecer muchísimo al Tecnológico de Monterrey, especialmente al doctor Daniel Mosca, por supuesto, Autogranados, a Ricardo Flores Zambada, a Carlos David Lugo, con quien hemos estado trabajando mucho. Y por supuesto, muchísimas gracias al señor subsecretario José Antonio Torre y a Rosín, de parte de la Organización de los Estados Americanos, que ha estado trabajando. Yo quisiera no entrar en el estudio, sino poner un poco en el contexto por qué estamos aquí, por qué la Organización de los Estados Americanos está aquí apoyando este esfuerzo. Nosotros somos una organización política y tenemos un propósito muy concreto. Nosotros tenemos la misión de ayudar a los países a lograr un poco más de gobernabilidad democrática. Y esto lo hacemos de diferentes maneras, y especialmente en el área que está a cargo mía, que es el área que tiene que ver con los temas de desarrollo. Lo que nosotros hacemos es promover esencialmente el diálogo, y a través del diálogo encontrar pues las buenas experiencias, a veces las malas experiencias, y de esta manera generar consensos y acuerdos, y sobre todo generar colaboración. Y a través de esto que hablamos de diálogo, colaboración, consenso, lo que estamos haciendo concretamente se llama gobernabilidad democrática, y esa es la esencia de nuestra organización. Y esto es lo que hacemos a través de estas acciones como las que hoy tenemos aquí. ¿Cuál es el efecto de esto que estamos atestiguando ahora, que vamos a iniciar unos minutos? Nosotros hemos convocado, la Organización de los Estados Americanos, a todo el hemisferio, para que a través de webcast nos sigan y puedan ver esta reunión, esta plática, esta conferencia. La intención es muy concreta, lo decía el doctor Otto Granados. Se trata no solo de generar conocimiento sobre un tema fundamental, como es el tema del talento y su distribución geográfica en el mundo, sino también se trata que a partir de ello podamos derivar acciones concretas de políticas públicas, de políticas privadas y de políticas, por supuesto, académicas que resultan fundamentales. En consecuencia, quiero decirles que el efecto, el impacto de lo que estamos haciendo aquí va mucho más allá de este espacio que tenemos, va mucho más allá de las personas que aquí estamos asistiendo, Estamos siendo seguidos seguramente por muchos policy makers de todo el hemisferio. Nosotros como organización tenemos el compromiso, y esta es nuestra función, de que los resultados de estos estudios y los resultados de estos diálogos los llevemos a los foros de diálogos políticos de alto nivel, donde están autoridades de diversos sectores que por supuesto están interesados por conocer los temas que son fundamentales al desarrollo, como lo es especialmente el caso del talento, y en este caso del talento humano. En el próximo mes de octubre, el 24 al 26 de octubre, sostendremos un foro de competitividad de las Américas. Por cierto, el TEC de Monterrey es una de las instituciones académicas de apoyo muy importante, con una presencia muy significativa que estará ahí. Y en este foro acuden los responsables de competitividad de todo el hemisferio. Y ahí discuten, ahí toman a veces acciones concretas, a veces acuerdan colaboración, y muchas veces se ponen de acuerdo en sentidos, en orientaciones de políticas públicas en materia de competitividad. Ahí vamos a llevar los resultados de este diálogo, los resultados de este taller. De igual manera, quiero decirles que nos están siguiendo ministros, autoridades responsables de las áreas de educación, que también tenemos una reunión ministerial al respecto, de las áreas de ciencia y tecnología, que también es fundamental y que por supuesto tiene mucho que ver con esto, con este tema, y del área del trabajo. Así es pues que el efecto de este esfuerzo es muy amplio y esperemos será de enorme significado. La idea es que justamente quienes tienen la responsabilidad de adoptar políticas públicas puedan, con base en estos esfuerzos, tener mejores elementos, mejores herramientas, mejores instrumentos para tomar las decisiones que correspondan en cada uno de los casos. En ese sentido, pues, quiero decirles que este es un evento de enorme trascendencia, no solo para el TEC de Monterrey, no solo para México, sino para todo nuestro hemisferio, y nosotros nos sentimos particularmente agradecidos de poder estar aquí apoyando y ser parte de este esfuerzo. Yo quisiera señalar que con el TEC de Monterrey hay una amplia, muy amplia colaboración en diferentes áreas, no solo en temas de competitividad, también ahora mismo en la Organización de los Estados Americanos está abierta una convocatoria para cursos tanto presenciales como virtuales con el TEC de Monterrey. Así es pues que nos une una relación muy, muy intensa, muy extensa, y yo espero que esto sea en beneficio no solo del TEC de Monterrey, sino de todos los pueblos de las Américas. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, señor Sagiante, por su mensaje. A continuación, para que inicie la presentación del estudio Talento Global 2012, invitamos al señor Adrián Cooper, CEO de Oxford Economics.
Thank you and good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd particularly like to thank the Tecnológico de Monterrey and the Organization of American States inviting me to speak today, and also for the OAS for their support in the research that I'm going to be talking about. I'm talking about talent, and I should begin by apologizing that my talents do not run to presenting in your language, so apologies that I have to speak in English. Just to very briefly introduce Oxford Economics, it kind of feels a little bit like being at home here in the business school today. Oxford Economics was founded 30 years ago as a joint venture with the business school in the university in Oxford, and we've grown to be one of the world's leading providers of economic forecasting and consultancy to governments, to international institutions, and to blue chip companies. Global Talent 2021 is a major study, as you've heard, sponsored by the OAS and a range of other leading organizations, including Towers Watson, American Express, Coca-Cola, Cummins, AIG, BAT, and Edison International. And they came together to look at the sorts of issues that are summarized in this slide here. So we want to know how global business demands for talent will develop as we look over the next 10 years. What skills are going to be most wanted by business? What's going to be less in demand by the time we get to 2021? How will demographic trends, aging populations, birth trends and so on affect the availability of talent in different countries? Will the supply of skilled labour meet what business needs? Where is there going to be too much labour? Where might there be shortages? And how do companies react to those challenges? And indeed, how do governments address the policy challenges associated with those talent pressures as well? Now, to address these questions, we undertook a study with several important elements, as you've already heard. A survey of just over 350 senior human resource executives from leading companies around the world, some detailed forecasting for employment trends, demand for talent across 46 countries, including 9 from Latin America, an assessment of what's happening in terms of demographics and education trends in influencing the supply of talent, and then looking at how talent practices in companies affect their performance and how companies are improving their management of their talent to ensure that they have the skills available to facilitate their growth going forwards. Before I come on to the findings of the study in detail, I think it's important just to set the macroeconomic context. And what this chart does is it shows the growth in GDP across regions of the world out to 2021. What it shows at the bottom is that when recovery eventually happens in the advanced countries like the European Union and US and Canada, actually that's going to be very slow. So those economies are going to see relatively modest expansions over the next 10 years, given the problems that they have with government debt, private sector debt, and so on. But in contrast, for more emerging market regions, areas particularly like Asia, but also Latin America, our forecasts see a continuation of strong growth over the course of the next 10 years, such that by 2021 in Asia, GDP will be around 8% bigger than it is today. In Latin America, maybe around 50% bigger. And I think one of the important factors that's going to be driving that growth is the increasing emergence of the middle class within these regions, which is providing a really critical mass consumer base to drive growth from domestic sources as we move forward. But that also has implications for the demand and availability of talent as well. Now, the strength of this growth that we're expecting in emerging market economies and the weakness of the more advanced economies is reflected in what the respondents to our survey tell us about likely growth in talent demand over the next 5 to 10 years, and that's illustrated here. So really it's reflecting the same patterns as in the previous slide. Talent demand is likely to grow most rapidly in emerging Asia, over 20% or so. In Latin America, though, it's around 12%, but a big contrast with North America and Western Europe, where it's down in the low single digits. And this table from the study just illustrates those numbers in more detail. So within that growth in Latin America, around 13%, what we see is particularly strong demand expected by our survey respondents from the financial services sector, from travel and transport, from life sciences, but also still quite strong in heavy manufacturing as well. Now you might expect, given the strong growth in GDP and the implications that has for talent demand in emerging markets, that it would translate into a picture where we see severe talent pressures in these economies come 2021. But that's not, as you've heard already, what our study shows. Here we see the sort of spectrum between, in green, the countries where they have, according to our projections, a likely surplus of talent come 2021, and then at the other end, in red, the countries where there will be the greatest shortage of talent come 2021. And those countries in green, those are typically, with some exceptions, the emerging market economies. So it includes places like India, Indonesia, Colombia, South Africa, Brazil. In contrast, where there are talent shortages, it's typically the richer economies of the world, and that includes the United States, places like South Korea, Italy, Japan as well. Mexico, interestingly, is in broad balance, and I'll come back to talk about this in a little bit more detail, but I think it's just worth stressing that as I'm talking about talent gaps, I'm talking today about how we see the picture in 2021, rather than how we see the picture today. So some of the conclusions of our study may differ from other research that you see that is focused on talent gaps today. Our focus very much is on 2021. Before I explore these results in more detail, let me just say a little bit about what our survey tells us about how the talent landscape is changing globally according to companies. The first point is to emphasize that organizations are reporting that there are big market shifts underway that are influencing their talent requirements. So, as you can see here, the globalization of markets, increasing competition, particularly from companies in emerging market countries, the advances in technology and digital media, and changes in consumer needs and behavior are all transforming the way in which companies need to operate in today's global economy, and that in turn knocks on to their talent needs. And that in turn is leading to strategic initiatives within these companies that are shaping their talent programs. So companies are just now increasingly aware that they have to be focused on global expansion. That to stay competitive, they have to do that in the context of ensuring value for money and efficiency. They have to enhance the quality of what they're doing and their customer service, be focused on emerging markets, and in particular be as well driving innovation. And this is changing the sort of skills that companies are looking for from the talent that they're hiring. And in our study, we looked at 4 different groups of skills to understand which skills are going to be in the greatest demand looking over the next 5 to 10 years. Let me just say something briefly about these. This shows, firstly, what our survey response was telling us about how important they think that agile thinking skills will be going forwards. And in this case, I'm comparing results from the Americas as a whole with Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, and with companies in Asia Pacific. And what comes out really is that organizations are in a context of an increasingly uncertain and volatile global economy looking for talent that's able to cope with that uncertainty, that's able to think about the implications of different ways in which the world might develop and what that means for business strategies, that's able to think through complex situations, balance alternative views, but also have a very strong focus on innovation. And if we split these survey results for the Americas between the US and Canada on the one hand and companies in Latin America on another, it really is that focus on skills that are innovative, that are coming out very strongly with regard to requirements for agile thinking skills by companies in Latin America. I think they see that as important in establishing themselves in new countries, in new markets. The second set of skills that we looked at are interpersonal and communication skills. I'm just now going to show you the results comparing the US and Canada with Latin American respondents. Here, you can see that for Latin America, teaming comes out as being a particularly important skill, including virtual teaming. And I think that's a reflection of the size and the geographical dispersion of the region, and the need for companies here to be able to work across countries, to be able to create scale, to be competitive into today's global economy. But again, the importance of innovation comes out in terms of co-creativity, and brainstorming is a very important skill. Not surprisingly, digital skills are also very important to respondents to our survey. In Latin America, again, the ability to work virtually is seen as a critical digital skill, but the whole gamut of digital business skills, the ability to use corporate IT, digital design skills, and so on are also seen as very important by companies in the region. The final set of skills that we looked at are global operating skills, and in the environment of strong growth in emerging markets that we envisage, the ability to operate internationally is clearly going to be critical, and that includes, within Latin America, in particular, the importance that companies place on foreign language skills, something, as you can see, I fail at. But the picture coming out of our survey overall that I want to underline is that in this new talent landscape, companies are looking for staff who are increasingly flexible in terms of their location and their thinking. They're very able with regard to new technology. They're good team workers, both locally and with colleagues virtually. They're innovative and forward-thinking, and they're international in terms of their skills and their views. Now, we've taken into account these insights from our survey as we've developed our projections for talent demand and talent supply looking over the next 10 years. So let me come on to say something about our forecasting for talent demand. First up, just to say very briefly, the approach that we've taken here, we're looking at talent demand, which we define as demand for college-educated workers in three key occupations: in executive grades, in the professions, and in technical occupations as well. And we're looking at that across 46 countries, 21 industries, and in total 10 different occupation groups. In building our forecast, we draw on the Oxford Economics global models for our macroeconomic assumptions about GDP and productivity and so on. We have detailed industry forecasts that tell us about the composition of growth between sectors, and we draw on those to see which industries are going to be most heavily demanding talent. We're looking at trends in labour force composition, which occupations are likely to be most in demand, and how is the use of different skills changing within companies. And we're also looking at how over time the educational qualifications you need to work in certain occupations are changing as well. We bring all that together, and this results in our projections for the growth in talent demand in college-educated workers looking out to 2021 that you can see here. And really this confirms the results of the survey that I was showing you earlier. The strongest growth in talent demand, not surprisingly, in emerging markets. Interestingly, on our modelling, Latin American countries typically come out very much at the top end of this league table, if you like. So we have Colombia, Bermuda, Brazil, Chile, Costa Rica, Mexico, all very high within the fastest growing countries with regard to talent demand. In contrast, for places like the UK, Germany, Russia right down at the bottom, very slow growth expected in talent demand in those countries. If I just focus briefly on the situation with regard to talent demand here in Mexico and look at it for some of the key sectors, overall we are anticipating talent demand to grow by around 4% a year here over the next decade. The strongest areas of growth that we see are, for instance, in construction and distribution, and I think that partly reflects the strength of output we expect to see in those sectors in the next 10 years. It's partly that those are sectors that are not typically as high productivity growth sectors as, say, manufacturing, so as they grow, they will require an increasing amount of labour, and it's partly as the nature of those services are changing and upskilling, that will lead to increased demand for talent. The other area that's very strong is the primary sectors of mining and energy, as we see growth there. But you can see from this slide, really, we're expecting demand for talent to increase healthily across all sectors in the Mexican economy, including education and health. A big difference from, say, those sectors in some of the European countries where they're being squeezed by tight government austerity. Now, we've been looking in those charts in terms of the percentage growth in the demand for talent over the next decade. Let me just convert it into absolute numbers, the increase in millions of people demanded in terms of talent. And overall, the demand for college-educated workers here in Mexico, we see growing from about 7.2 million today to nearly 10 million come 2021. And again, that's particularly in the construction and distribution sectors where we expect to see talent demand rising by well over 1 million people. We can also look at that growth by type of occupation as well. And you can see the strongest growth we're expecting in the most skilled white-collar jobs, so the executive jobs, the professions. Strong growth too, though, in other white-collar jobs, so that's administrative jobs, customer support jobs, and so on. Less strong in the craft and skilled agricultural plant operator areas, and I think this pattern is a reflection of the way in which we expect to see the mix of the economy change as it grows and becomes increasingly rich, and as a consequence becomes more focused on the service sectors. That's the demand side of the picture. Let me now come on to the talent supply side. In terms of our methodology for these projections, we're drawing on detailed demographic information from the United Nations and from country agencies, some statistical modelling we've done to look at how trends in educational attainment are changing, what that means for the availability of workers with different skills. We're looking at how public investment in education is affecting the availability of labour. We use our survey of workforce skills that I've been talking about already and draw on a variety of other surveys as well. When we put all that information together, these are the projections that we have for talent supply out to 2021. Again, the countries in the emerging market world come out top of the league table, and many Latin American countries in particular very high in terms of the rates of growth they're going to see in talent supply. Partly this is down to demographics, that's the red bars within this chart. That's a reflection of the fact that typically populations in the emerging world are younger than in the advanced economies, birth rates are higher, and so on. But you can see also a very large component of the growth that we expect in talent supply in the emerging market economies is down to education, down to the investment there is in college education, an increasing middle class with rising aspirations for their children, an ability to afford education for their children too, and the sort of job opportunities that we're seeing develop in these countries, which is sucking people into education to want to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. In contrast, in the advanced economies, we have aging populations, indeed, populations of working age already shrinking in places like Germany and Russia, and growth in the education contribution to talent supply much slower here, partly because we have an already much larger pool of educated workers in these economies, so achieving growth is a little bit more difficult from what's already a very high base. But I think it's also a reflection of what we see as being the impact, for instance, of public spending cuts in some of these countries and people worrying about the return that they're going to get if they invest in their education. Mexico, as you can see, right in the middle of this chart, its talent supply growing just over 4%, split, half coming from demographics and half for education. I think one of the things, though, that's notable about Mexico's position on this chart is the net outward migration that it has of talent, in contrast to most of the other countries that are examples here. One of the implications of that strong growth in supply of talent in emerging markets is actually there's going to be a dramatic shift in where the most educated workers are by 2021. At that point, the majority of the world's college-educated talent will actually be in emerging markets. China is the lead at 28%, but 13% in India, 11% in Russia, 3% in Brazil and Mexico. And what's particularly striking about the 3% of the world's college-educated talent pool that Mexico will have, according to our projections by 2021, is that means it will have more college-educated workers than, say, Canada or France or Germany or Italy or the UK. That's a tremendous competitive opportunity for countries like Mexico to drive stronger growth in the long term if they can capture that potential through increased innovation, increased entrepreneurship, and so on. This chart just focuses in on talent supply for the economy in the Americas. Again, it shows Latin America well ahead of the US and Canada, Colombia at the top, Mexico around the average rate of growth for talent supply in the region. So if we now bring together those projections for supply and demand for talent, looking just within the Americas to narrow down the focus, essentially we've got three groups. We've got countries like Colombia, Brazil, Costa Rica, where growth in the supply of talent is likely to exceed that for demand. Places like Chile, the US and Canada, where supply is likely to grow more slowly than demand. And then a small number of countries in the middle, like Mexico, where there's close to broad balance between growth in supply and demand of talent. It's easier to see those talent gaps here in this slide. So if the numbers are positive, that's telling you that you've got more supply than demand of talent. If they're negative, you've got more demand than supply. So the shortage of talent. Mexico, a slight difference, but I don't want to make too much of that, given it's pretty close to zero. And indeed, it would actually go away if Mexico wasn't a net outward exporter of talent. Looking globally, I think if we put all these talent gaps together onto one map, they highlight this very interesting picture of the contrast between, if you like, the north and the south. And we have a situation in which typically in emerging economies we have an excess of talent supply. In contrast, in the richer economies we have talent shortages. In terms of sectors, where we expect to see the biggest strains within Mexico are in those areas where we expect to see the demand for talent growing most rapidly. So it's construction, distribution, the primary sector. Other areas of the economy are going to have less pressure in terms of the availability of talent supply. Let me just then come on in concluding to some of the implications of this analysis. The first thing just to mention very briefly are some of the implications for corporate HR strategies. And I think that what our study is highlighting is that there are going to be a number of markets in which there is going to be potentially a very significant shortage of talent, and even in countries like Mexico, where the talent balance is going to be broadly even, there are going to be some sectors that are going to be struggling with a potential talent shortage. That means that HR executives are going to have to be increasingly rigorous and sophisticated in how they manage that talent, use evidence-based talent management, use sophisticated analytical tools in greater detail to be able to ensure that they have talent in the right quantity, in the right place. They're going to have to think more about how and where talent is sourced, so what's the potential for drawing on, for instance, that surplus of talent in some emerging market economies and using that in countries where there's insufficient talent, or alternatively, can companies be thinking about relocating jobs to where the talent is? And on top of that, there needs to be more investment in retraining and reskilling. In terms of broader policy implications, to close, I think the sort of things that come out from the research that we've done is to meet the talent challenges that countries are going to face going forwards is something that's going to require partnership. It's not something that can be solved by governments alone, corporates alone. It needs an involvement of them and academia, and not only within their own country, but internationally, and appropriate fora are needed to be established, including at a sector level to enable that dialogue to happen. We think it's good for governments to undertake skills assessments and projections for key growth sectors to help to guide their talent policies. Where should they be putting the focus of their efforts? And likewise, companies should be surveying their staff to identify skill gaps, training needs, how they can develop talent that's within their own business. That leads into the need for more training as well, and equally on the other side, encouraging workers to embrace increased opportunities for education and lifelong learning. Then, we need to be looking at ways we can enhance labour participation, particularly amongst women and older workers. And we need to recognise that we are moving into a world where there will be mismatches of talent between countries. We need to ensure that the national borders are open for the movement of skilled labour so that talent can go where it is most valuable. And that means, for instance, looking at international codes that facilitate migration. There's no doubt other policy implications from the research that we're going to discuss this morning, but with that, I just want to highlight that our study is available online for anyone who's interested to read more and download it. And thank you all for your attention.
A continuación, para que nos compartan los comentarios sobre la metodología, análisis y conclusiones del estudio y sus implicaciones pedagógicas, invitamos al doctor Ricardo Flores Zamada, vicerrector del Talento Cultural del Tecnológico de Monterrey.
Gracias, buenos días. Gracias. Me voy a tomar 10 minutos básicamente para, no para presentar el estudio ya ha sido presentado por ADER. Lo que yo voy a hacer es darles un punto de vista sobre cómo fue elaborado este estudio. Y para ello, primeramente voy a hablar sobre la metodología. Ya escuchamos que este estudio, hay un modelo econométrico detrás de él, hay entrevistas, hay cuestionarios que se aplicaron a los líderes de recursos humanos de empresas globales, de muchas empresas. Y algo muy importante en la metodología que veo en este estudio es cómo están integrando un análisis cuantitativo, matemático,